G'day everybody, here we are, Wade Northhausen for Billboard Battalion, coming to you today from downtown Cayuga in north central Victoria. Today is Tuesday the 11th of February 2025. So we've had a lot happening in the Australian Federal Parliament. There's been a lot of chatter and a lot of concern over a bill that passed, I think it was last Thursday, into law and became an act. And this was, they were making amendments to the criminal code. It's called the Criminal Code Amendment Hate Crimes Bill 2025, and then was voted on and became law. However, you know, there's a fair bit of stuff that we need to talk about on how it was voted on. There's been a lot of problems and issues and dramas and so on with that. And one of the issues for a start was the way it was rammed through the Parliament. And I know a number of politicians have complained about how they got no time to debate. There was, I think, maybe an hour or something like that for the Parliament to debate this bill. And given how far-reaching and how dangerous, in my opinion, this bill is, and how complex it is, that it might take people a fair bit of time to read it, digest it, then ask the relevant questions, somebody else asks the relevant questions, and then they get an actual idea of what it is that they're voting on. Now, as I always say, if the government is trying to ram something through, then it's no good. It's as simple as that. That's the rule of thumb as far as I'm concerned. So you know, we've had a number of politicians complaining about how they didn't get a chance. Somebody put up a motion to say that they got more time, and I think it was voted down by one of the minor parties, or a few of them plus the minor party. So I think what we need to have for a start in our Parliament, given that the Senate is supposed to be the House of Review, and it seems to me that there's two reasons why you would want to rush something through. Number one, so it doesn't have a proper opportunity for people who might vote on it to hear all the evidence and then make an informed decision. Number two is everything that happens in the Parliament is recorded in what they call Hansard. So Hansard is an exact recording and record of everything that's said. So if there was actually decent debate on this bill before it became an act, then all of the discussions and arguments backwards and forwards would then be recorded in Hansard. So when this thing gets used for nefarious purposes, for illegal purposes, and for criminal purposes by the government and by the judiciary, then we would have some kind of a reference to look back on and say, that was never intended to do that. So this is, and a lot of people who have concerns about it in the first place, their opposition to it will be recorded. So, there's a lot that's wrong there for a start. So as I said, my rule of thumb, if the government says, we've got no time to debate it, we're just going to vote on it, then immediately your vote will be no. That's it. If it can't stand scrutiny, then do not vote for it, no matter what. Simple as that. So I wanted to look at some of what's the problem with this thing, and what so many commentators are talking about, and a number of politicians. And this thing, as far as I can understand, the so-called intention of it is to deal with terrorism. And we're seeing a lot of stuff going on in, I think, particularly Melbourne and Sydney, that is very, very seriously bad, based on religion, ideology, and politics. So that's what we're told this is about. But I can tell you right now, as everything we know. The government deliberately creates problems and serious situations, and then what do you know? They just happen to come up with the answer when many in the public are saying the government's got to do something about this. So from a lot of the commentators that I listen to and talk with, there's already the laws in place to deal with this, but the state governments and or federal government are not using them, because it would appear to me, in my opinion, that they're deliberately trying to cause these ructions and problems and so on that is going on, so they can start to bring in laws like this that, in my opinion, encroach on everybody's ability to operate in Australia, and also can be extended or amended to cover other things. And I think this is very, very important. It's a very important part. So a couple of the things that people are really up in arms about is some of the terms that are now so oblique, opaque, that we can't sort of get an idea of what the hell it even means. It's so broad, it's so non-descriptive. So, here they talk about, this is just one of the sections, threatening force or violence against groups. Okay, so we get that. The benchmark use was intentionally urges, and I'm assuming someone intentionally urges someone else to use force or violence. So if they're intentionally urging someone to do it, then you know the deal. But they've changed that now to advocate. So that's a bit of a different thing. That becomes more broad and a little bit more hard to determine exactly what that means. So there's one of the things that are red flags for a start. And when the government starts to make things that are unclear, particularly in the law, you better believe they're going to use it for bad purposes. Absolutely, without a doubt. So we also look at another one of the terms that have been changed that says somebody that intends that. And I think that the context would be intends that somebody will attack someone else. This is the new wording, reckless as to whether. Right. Reckless as to whether. So the problem here is that the government, and I realise this is all legal jargon, it's all written in some of that legal kind of stuff, and I'm not a lawyer, I'll say that right from the start, but I can read English, so coming at this from a position of, we know that our governments are controlled from a fair way away. In fact, I think now that some of the terrorist organisations that actually run the government are now here and doing it on the ground. But anyway, having said that, this stuff is getting very, very so broad that who the hell knows what it even means. Reckless as to whether. So, I think that we need to be keeping a good eye on this. This is bad. And it says here in one other section that, I think needs a lot of clarification. And we are in the act of trying to get hold of a lawyer that I can interview about all this stuff. So, we're trying to track down the actual legal eagles so we can put these questions to them and say, right, what does this stuff actually mean? And what does this mean for, people on the street? What's this going to mean for our farmers and for other people who might protest about something? So one thing here that I think needs clarification, it says when they're talking about the threat, somebody's making a threat to somebody else. The threat, if carried out, would threaten the peace, order and good government of the Commonwealth. So, okay, the good would threaten the peace, order and good government of the Commonwealth. So we're talking about something that may be affecting something that government's doing. So we've got some pretty big questions here. In other sections here, it talks about damage to vehicles and damage to real property. So I'm just wondering, and I must say that another part here that is incredibly concerning is they talk about now mandatory jail terms. And I think there's some parts of it talk about 3 years, some's 5 years and some 7 years. So as I understand, and once again, I want to try and interview a lawyer to get the actual nuts and bolts of this. But if they're saying mandatory jail terms for people up to 7 years, for doing what could be something very, very little or unintended or what anybody would think is over the top. Particularly when, as far as to my knowledge, if you're a pedophile or child rapist, I'm not aware of any mandatory sentencing length of time, for example 7 years, or if you're, say for example, a bank robber or a murderer, I'm not aware of any mandatory sentencing there. So you'd think that those things are pretty bad, and if there's going to be mandatory sentencing, then you know that should be covered by stuff before any of this is. So one of the big concerns that I have, as I said, is could this be expanded? Could this be amended to include, for example, protest action by, well, anybody really, but let's just look right now at farmers. A lot of these things that they're talking about here, I think, you know, the way I see it, could easily be applied to farmers who are protesting against, for example, renewable energy stuff. If people intend on turning up somewhere in numbers, if power companies come onto properties, then this here could very, very easily be adapted. If you are reckless as to whether advocate some sort of threatening force or violence against a group. You know, this is what the problem with this is. This could be applied to really anything, because they talk about this is some sort of something to do with terrorism. And I want you to keep in mind very, very clearly that it wasn't that long ago that we saw Peter Dutton, we saw ASIO, Federal Police talking about domestic terrorism. Now we hear a lot of this from the state governments about domestic terrorists, and they could be somebody who just has a protest, who doesn't believe in climate change, who wants to stop some kind of a banning of the sheep exports, who might not want all their chooks to be murdered under some disgusting H5N1 alleged outbreak. So, you know, there's so many things here. Anybody protesting against anything that the government does in terms of farming, or perhaps the transport industry, perhaps some other industry. So I think that, you know, we need to keep this very, very clearly in our sights. And I think that we need to have our farmer representative lobby groups really look through this stuff with a fine-tooth comb and see where it's at and what it could easily become. Because I can tell you right now, they want to put this renewable energy stuff in. They want to ban the sheep. And as far as I can see, this is a prelude to the stuff they want to use to attack people who might try and stop it or protest against it. So the domestic terrorist things, you know, that all comes down to what they just decide is a domestic terrorist. And keep in mind, in America, the FBI branded domestic terrorists as parents who turned up at a school board meeting and said, we don't want certain sexual things being taught to our kids, and we don't want our kids having school sanctioned sex change operations. And this, parents who just turned up and if, you know, if you're on the Bible side, the godly side or whatever, you know, they said they wanted things not done that were against the Bible in terms of what's happening to their kids. and the FBI branded them domestic terrorists and should be watched and interrogated and so on. So I think this is very, very dangerous stuff. Yes, I think we need to watch this space. We'll be trying to get a lawyer, see if we can get some clarification on this, but we also need to get everybody heads up. This is happening. This is very serious, and we need to be keeping a very good eye on this. In fact, this garbage needs to be repealed, because as we all know, they tell you there's some disaster they need to fix, and then the next thing you know, they blow it out of proportion and it goes against us. So tomorrow night, Wednesday night, we'll be heading across to St Arnaud. There's a meeting across at St Arnaud, farmers meeting over there. So Billboard Battalion will be heading over there, and yeah, we'll give you some more updates as they come along, and if we can get an interview with a lawyer, we'll bring that to you as soon as we possibly can. So anyway, keep fit, stay strong, keep in the game, and